Hi, I'm Lindsay Christian. Thank you for watching Sarder TV. Rick Snyder is the author of Decisive Intuition, a brand new book in which he writes about the 6-step decision process to help you tap into your gut instinct to make better decisions in business. I'm so excited to sit down and talk to him. Thanks for joining us, Rick.
Thanks for having me.
Just give me some information about your history, your journey, like who is Rick Snyder?
Yeah, so I think what got me started on this journey was my passion for what makes human beings do the things they do, and just being really curious about what really motivates us. So I've always been interested in human behavior, and so that's where I studied psychology even as far as back as high school. And then that kind of carried me toward learning more about the different ways that we achieve and what's behind that and what gets in our way. And so that led me eventually to the worlds of life coaching and business coaching. And so
what is Invisible Edge? What motivated you to create this company?
Yeah, so Invisible Edge is a global consulting firm where we specialize in intuitive leadership, intuitive sales, and innovation. So we're working with corporates and also entrepreneurial startups to really help them tap into that intuitive intelligence and skills so that they actually have that invisible edge over their competition.
Oh, there's the play on word. I was wondering, what is so it's an invisible edge, kind of a play on word there.
Exactly. The idea is that you can't really see intuition or smell it or touch it or taste it, but it's there. And most people have some relative in their family who is always that intuitive one that you would go to for advice or counsel. And so that's really what we're harnessing, is the idea that all of us have access to our intuitive intelligence and skills. And so developing that provides an invisible edge, whether you're doing sales or management or leadership or whatever that might be.
Oftentimes in business you talk about having an edge up or leg up or kind of a heads up on something or to get ahead of the game. So is that kind of what you were thinking as you were creating this model for your company and your business?
Exactly. Basically there's a whole I think of intuition as a currency, and it's a currency that we often don't utilize consciously. And so what we're trying to do is help people actually get more connected to how they actually are picking up on data and information all the time that they might not be aware of. And so how do you actually get more aware of all the data, whether you're interacting in a business deal, you're setting strategy for your company, a marketing plan, whatever it might be, how do you start to intuit what wants to happen next? And that's actually what we're teaching people.
You work with small businesses, entrepreneurs. Tell us about who you work with.
Yeah, we work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies right now, so pretty large.
Okay, yeah, not small business, clearly.
Not small business, but we actually do also work with a lot of entrepreneurial startups. And where that excites me is just the hunger for innovation and creativity. And that's probably the connecting thread in all the businesses that we work with, are business leaders, managers that really are progressive, open-minded, and are willing to look at alternative ways to think outside the box to have a whole new innovative solution.
What has been the secret to your success as CEO of Invisible Edge?
Yeah, I think part of the success is identifying that there's a whole area of intuition that people have not really explored in the business space. So just like emotional intelligence came out, the book came out 25 years ago, but I would say that the business world didn't really catch on to it until like the last 8 or 10 years. And now it's a no-brainer to harness the emotional intelligence with your team, with your customers, etc. But there's a whole nother level of our evolution now, another nuance around what I'm calling intuitive intelligence. So it's even more nuanced. It's not just about emotions, of all the ways that we get data, information, and we can actually utilize that to make better decisions.
What motivated you to write the book about decisive intuition? You actually wrote the book while living in the south of France.
That's right.
Why the south of France?
Yeah, so this is one of those moments where I have to live when I'm teaching, right? So
I love that concept, right? You'd think you have to just put yourself in a box and write a book, but why not live and enjoy the experience?
Right, and then also for me, sometimes intuition is uncomfortable because it's going to lead you towards a choice that might not always be in your comfort zone. And yet you still have the courage to listen to that and take action on it. And that's really one of the main differentiators we talk about. So, for example, I was living in the States and I just had this deep sense that I needed to get into a whole new perspective and a whole new mindset and have a fresh outlook. So I literally had an inner sense, I'm not kidding, to move to Cannes, France, right on the water in the Mediterranean.
Beautiful.
And I found the apartment that I wanted to find, and it had a sea view. And it was really an inspiring place to write a book. And it was really quiet, I had a garden, a great family that lived below me that was an American-French family, and I could walk to the Mediterranean in 15 minutes and still have a peaceful ambiance to write and concentrate.
How long did it take you to write the book?
It took me about 1.5 years to write the book, and then about another year to actually get from production of the publishing company to the shelves. So it took about 2.5 years total. We
take a deep dive into intuitive intelligence. What is that definition in layman's terms? Like, what does that mean? What is intuitive intelligence?
Yeah, so for me, intuitive intelligence is being able to access our subconscious mind for faster and more integrated decision making. And so some of the neuroscience behind this, for example, is that our conscious mind, we process information about 40 bits per second. So right now you're tracking me, you're tracking the lighting, the sound. So about 40 bits of information is what you can handle consciously, but subconsciously we're picking up 20 million bits of information. So imagine 40 bits to 20 million bits. So the idea here is that if we can help you get into your subconscious mindset, and that's where you're actually connecting information much faster. In dream states, that's why sometimes people say, if you're having a really difficult decision in your life, sleep on it. And there's actually science behind that. Because if you do, your subconscious mind is actually connecting the dots throughout the day and all the things that you were ruminating over or what have you. So actually, you actually make a better decision when you get into that subconscious space.
I find that to be true. I often think of ideas and business ideas or answers to a question I might be pondering when I'm asleep. That is so interesting. But in the busyness of the day-to-day, how do you take a moment and find that stillness to tap into the subconscious?
You know, that's probably one of the hardest things in our modern times, what you just said. And it really takes an extra effort to carve out that space and time. And so sometimes, clients that we work with, we have them set a task reminder on their phone or a little bell, a chime that kind of reminds them, oh, I'm going to take that 5 minutes and get away from the computer or turn off my phone for 5 minutes and actually just tune in and bring in some mindfulness to my day, whatever that might be, so I can start to listen to the data and all the information that's been accumulating. Like, what's the information I'm getting? But if I don't take time to slow down and tune in, then I'm not going to actually track what my intuition's telling me.
Can it be learned, or is it something that's innate? Tapping into that intuitive intelligence. Is it something that could be learned, or is it a habit that you would develop over time through practice?
Yeah, I think it's both. And so I think of it just like music, where there's going to be some people who are just Mozart.
Oh, right.
And most of us who are not,
right?
Right? Most of us who are not. Or people who are going to be destined to go to the NBA because they have that talent, but most of us don't. I'm never gonna dunk a basketball. I've had to face that fact. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
But if you practice every day, if you practice that musical instrument every day, if you practice your scales, if you practice dribbling the basketball and shooting, you're gonna get incrementally better. So for me, intuition's the same, that we can actually learn to practice these skills and how to listen to what's the conversation that's not being mentioned in the office space, or how to tune into the nonverbal communication. We can actually get better at that if we practice and learn that that's actually a skill that we can adapt. So that's what we do at Invisible Edge, is we actually help people develop those skills.
Speaking of skills and developing that, talk about the 6-step process for leaders, executives, entrepreneurs to harness their intuitive intelligence. You talk about this in your book.
Actually, it's pretty much the spine of my book. And so I lead the reader through the 6 steps to tap into their intuitive center or their inner compass. So basically, how it starts is with a mindset shift. So the idea is, first, how do I, instead of trying to find my intuition and achieve that, how do I actually first take a mindset of being more receptive? So that's the first bit, is what if I'm not trying to seek my intuition, but I actually make room for intuition to find me? And so I have to first learn to be receptive to the information that I'm picking up in my strategy session, my one-on-one meeting with a new customer. So that's that first step, is that reception, right? Okay. And so the second one is, once I have a perspective of being more receptive, the second one is then to slow down.
That's so hard.
This
in
is
New
the
York
hardest
City,
bit, right?
At least.
New York City, London, Tokyo, wherever you are, even in the countryside with today's social media, we're bombarded with information more than we ever have been before. So the next key step is, how do we slow down our mindset and literally our blood pressure, our breath, literally get into a slower space.
Breathing exercises, do you also encourage those?
For sure. Yeah, breathing exercises is one of the best ways to slow down more to that subconscious state. You actually change your brain states when you breathe and slow down, and you open up your panoramic awareness in a different way.
Ooh, I like that,
right?
Panoramic awareness.
It's amazing.
It's like the 360 view of what's happening around you.
You know, one way I can talk about this is if you've ever seen those 3D prints where you're staring at all these dots, and it doesn't mean anything when you focus your eyes, but when you relax your gaze and you have that panoramic awareness, the 3D image starts to come alive. That's intuition. So if I start to open up my awareness, I'm going to become aware of other things that are happening in the room or in the space. And so that's that whole second step, is that slowing down allows that to happen.
So reception, slowing down.
The third step then is having to deal with our inner critic. Because what happens is when we slow down, we hear other voices in the head, right? That are like, hey,
distractions.
This is stupid, we don't have time for this, let's go back to work, we got to get on that deadline. And we all have that inner critic. And so part of what I've realized in this process is that when we slow down, we start becoming aware of all of our inner noise. And so how do we differentiate the voice of our inner critic from the voice of our intuition?
And how do you do that?
So that's a whole piece of, that's where I go into the deeper.
And how do you know
yeah.
it's the inner critic and not, it's almost kind of like this analogy of having the angel and the devil on your shoulder, right?
Yeah.
How do you know, how do you distinguish what's a distraction and what's actually like sound advice, listening to your gut?
Exactly. So one way that I've created a distinction around this is that usually your inner critic is going to have a lot of, it's going to sound like a broken record. It's a broken narrative from your whole history, and there's sometimes a lot of emotional charge to it. A lot of times with intuition, it's just very clear and clean, like, oh, I'm not supposed to take on this client, but it's not a big drama. Or, oh, this hire is not a fit, and you know that intuitively, but it's not a big story and a big drama about it, right? But a lot of times the inner critic, there's going to be a lot of charge emotionally, a whole narrative around it, a backstory, and it's probably one that's very familiar. So that's where that inner critic forms. So part of the work is then, how do I distinguish and differentiate, which that next third step gets into. So then you're more locked into your voice of your intuition, which leads to the fourth step.
Okay, wait, so receive, slow down,
befriend your inner critic.
Befriend your inner critic, okay.
So you actually befriend it instead of fight it all the time, right? So once you befriend it and you become the driver of the vehicle of self, not your critic, then what happens is you start to tune into your body. And then you can go in a deeper level of listening to your inner signals and cues. And so I have a whole chapter called Your Body is Wiser Than Your Mind. Because your mind will throw you off, right? A lot of times,
it will.
That critic, the different narratives that we have, the fears that we have, those kind of things. So that's when we tune into just what's happening in my body right now, and how do I use that as data for my relationships and what's happening in the moment, especially in business and outside of business. So that's really tuning into the body, and so the whole next fourth section goes really deep into that. Then the fifth section is, how do you ask for guidance? How do you actually develop a relationship with your intuition? Right? So now that you've really started to identify your signals and cues, because everyone has a different intuitive language, that's an important piece too. Like we talked about dream states.
Right.
Sometimes people get feelings and sensations and kinesthetics. Some people get images. Some people get audio, sound, and messaging that way. So part of it is learning your body and how do you get information. Once you establish that, and you can figure that out by looking at hindsight. Like when you got a strong gut reaction before.
Like we always say, hindsight is what,
right?
20/20.
And once you get that, then you'll start to track back at, oh, that's how my intuition speaks to me. So it's important to track those moments. So then the fifth step is asking for guidance. And so if, for example, if I'm confronted by a career choice and I don't know if I should choose A or B, that's when I'm starting to tune in and actually ask my inner guidance around, okay, tell me, body here.
Tell me, body.
Do I go left or right here? And I've had actually, in my book, I've interviewed a business owner, for example, where he actually said, should I stay in this job? And give me a sign either way. And he broke out into rashes. He broke out into a rash.
Talk about a clear sign.
Literally, like that psychosomatic connection, where literally his body was speaking to him of like, get out of this job. And he did, and it was the best thing he could have done. It's in the book here.
That's really tapping deeply into that intuition.
Exactly. And he said he didn't know where that came from because he had never even thought about doing that before, about checking in with himself on that level, but he did and it paid off. And then the last step is, once we establish that relationship by asking for guidance, the last step then is taking action. And this is one of the things that we usually pause on, is I might know what I'm feeling and I know what I need to do, but I'm afraid to have that conversation. I'm afraid to talk to my boss. I'm afraid to deal with my partner. I'm afraid to set a boundary with my client. Whatever that might be, even though I know in my bones that that's what needs to happen.
Right.
So the last step is actually putting it into action. Because if you don't put your intuitive intelligence into action, it's going to start to fade away. And you're not honoring your wisdom. You're not honoring your deeper intelligence. That's what really, this is really about.
Okay, when you think about your day-to-day, you're a CEO, you're an entrepreneur in your day-to-day, you know, how much time are you devoting to tapping in, or is it just something that you encourage should just happen naturally? I don't know if that's clear, but you know, how much time am I really taking if it's making a decision, if it's hiring someone to join my company? How is the intuition, how am I tapping into that in a sense of time?
Yeah.
Is this something that's just happening through the course of a day? Or do I really take 15 minutes, you know, close my office door and go through these 6 steps?
I think both are important. I think it's important to have some kind of practice where you're touching in with yourself and checking in with yourself daily. So I do think having an intentional practice, even if it's 10 minutes or 5 minutes, which seems like a lot for today's world, to turn everything off.
It is hard to do that.
And I mean turn everything off, right? So you can go internal. And so I think having some kind of basic practice every day gives you that touchstone so that when you're in the heat of the moment, you have that anchor point. And you can come back to that and right away check in with, oh yeah, got it, my solar plexus, that's my way of getting information, for example. And so then when I'm in a, have to make an immediate decision in the line of fire, I can quickly check in with my resource.
Right.
So when you build that relationship with yourself, you're going to identify where your resource is in your body, and it's going to be that much easier to access.
You write in a chapter, this was I think in 3, you don't find it, it finds you. What does that mean?
Yeah. So we live in a world, especially in the US, where we're so achievement-oriented and driven. And I'm like that too. And so it's so natural to go after the goal. Go after, I'm going to become a billionaire. I'm going to achieve enlightenment. I'm going to, like, what's the next goal, right? I'm going to have a 20-car garage. And so we're so wired that way, right? And so intuition doesn't work in that same dynamic. And so it's not something, once again, to achieve or hunt for. Instead, it's actually more of an opening that we have to create so that it can find us. So when we relax. And that's why I get some of my best downloads, my intuitive downloads, when I'm like in a steam room or a sauna or a hot shower or going for a run or a bike ride, where there's a way where my conscious mind switches off just a little bit. It dims out just a little bit so that I can enter that subconscious creative space. And so that's a lot of the work that we do with our clients, is we literally disrupt the conscious mind so that we can tap into that deeper well of innovation and subconscious.
It really sounds almost like a form of meditation, or perhaps meditation is included in this tapping into process.
Yeah, I would say meditation and mindfulness are some of the best ways to get into that open space so that intuition can find you. It's definitely one of the best ways. It's not the only ways, but it is one of the best ways that we can all access.
And you found that to be effective and has led to success for some of your clients.
Incredibly. Because imagine high-powered executives who, it's almost like an engine that's overheated. Like we all have that engine that's overheated, moving on to the next task, the next overwhelm.
Let's just go, 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 go,
right?
go.
And it's affecting our sleep, our health, our family life. And so it's so important to cool the engine so that we can actually have a whole new way that we navigate our decisions. It's so important.
We just talked about meditation, mental techniques. What other exercises would you recommend? Is it like counting to 10 to slow down? You know, what small techniques could we use in our day-to-day?
I'd recommend counting to 10 and slowing down. No, seriously.
Which, believe it or not, is hard to do. Even
You're
like you said, unplugging for 5 minutes. But it's really about just being present.
Exactly.
And being in stillness.
Exactly. It's one of the best ways, literally, is to count to 5 backwards, 10 backwards, but literally be mindful with your breath. So you literally breathe in and out, and that's one cycle. And then you do that again, and that's another cycle. And literally you're slowing down your typical way that you rev your engine mentally, and so you access a deeper mindset when you start to do that. So you create a state change for yourself. So that's one key way. One of my favorite ways, we call it dialectic thinking. So you're actually holding two opposites. So you might think of something that seems impossible and then something that is possible, and you hold both at the same time. We actually have a process where we walk executives through where they're working that out in this whole process that we have. And so it gets them to look at a creative third option that they never knew existed because they were too fixated on one side of the spectrum or the other, and their position was locked in, so they didn't have that creative third possibility. So that's a whole other way that sometimes we invent things. Like the guy, W.J.J. Gordon, who started Pringles potato chips.
Okay.
This is how he did it, is he actually was carrying this idea of, I'm tired of 2/3 of potato chip bags being filled with air.
Oh gosh, that is so annoying.
It's annoying, it's a ripoff, this is lame. And so he actually thought about how do we actually stack chips, but in a way that doesn't crumble?
It's clever.
Right? So he was holding two opposites around creating a more dense chip that doesn't destruct and crumble on itself. So he didn't know how to do that, but he held that possibility. So one day he's raking leaves in his backyard, and he realized when the leaves are dry, it's almost impossible to throw them in the garbage bag. But one day it was raining, and it was wet, and he saw how the leaves naturally formed on each other, and he was holding that in the back of his subconscious the whole time, this question of how do I do this? And so he realized, oh, I can do that with potato chips. So if I stack the chips, then soak them in oil, they're going to naturally form on each other, easier to stack on each other, and I could put them in a simple canister, and now we still have Pringles 4 decades later, or whatever it's been. And so that's an example. There's many examples of inventors who've held paradox and then been able to come up with that third innovation, the third possibility.
Let's talk about it. I mean, you talked about it a little bit at the beginning, the latest findings in neuroscience and techniques to access your intuitive subconscious mind for arriving at better decisions faster. Like you have to make a quick decision, but you don't have 15 minutes to spare. But what are some of the new developments, rather? Yeah,
so one of them is that we actually have 3 brains. And so we have our head brain that we all know of, but we also have a heart intelligence. Literally, we have 40,000 to 120,000 neurons in our heart center. We literally have a heart intelligence. So one thing that's been really interesting is when you have a heart donor who's donating their heart to a new person, a new body, that person who received the new heart transplant will have memories and gestures and emotions that are not native to them, but are native to the donor. So we literally, our organs literally store intelligence. And so there's ways to access your heart intelligence. And then the third one is your gut intelligence, where you actually have 500 million neurons in your gut. And some say that that was actually the first brain we had as amoebas, where the only 2 things we did was move towards food and move away from danger. And not that much has changed, in the business space especially.
So those 3, the head, the heart,
the head, heart, and the gut.
And they're working in tandem, really.
They're working in tandem. So what we do in our work in Invisible Edge is we actually help people connect and integrate their 3 brains in decision making. And I haven't seen anyone else really doing this out there. So it's amazing when you lead a team or a group of executives through this process, they're actually accessing deeper levels of intelligence with their critical mind also.
Of course.
So I'm not saying only intuition and not use your critical mind. I'm saying use it all.
Combine.
So we're helping people integrate all of what's possible, not just picking one side or the other.
What would you say would be the main takeaway from decisive intuition?
I think in a really simple way, the main takeaway is trust yourself. You're wiser than you give yourself credit for. And don't let only the data and analytics outside of you or the louder voices in the room necessarily take you off track from what you know to be true. And it's important to still check in with other people and colleagues and trusted advisors, because you can also get too siloed in your gut instinct and think that that's going to be the end-all be-all all the time. So it's important to stay in relationship with other people also that you respect and trust on your team, whoever that might be, so that you're having a good counterbalance. But that the real key here is to give yourself permission that you know what you need and what's best for you. It just it might take some time to learn your languaging and how to develop that relationship.
Would you say ultimately trust your gut? Is that what it is? Is that what it means to tap into that intuition? But we use that phrase every day, right? Trust your gut.
We do, and we use it for a reason, because I think we do have a wisdom in us that we don't always give credit for. But for me, even though trust your gut is really the phrase that we all know, for me it's bigger than that. We literally have neuroreceptors through our whole body. We have neurons in almost every cell of our body. So the whole key is how do we open up our full body wisdom to what we're experiencing in the moment as living beings that we are, and then we're getting all the data in real time, and then the brain will process that eventually. I think they found about 95% of our choices that we make are actually emotional, we think they're intellectual, but they're actually not.
And that's not just for women, right?
It's
very
not just
emotional.
for women. It's not just for women, but I think in one way women have a natural advantage in one way, where they actually have more connections in their corpus callosum, so they can actually integrate the words with pictures and with images and with emotion faster than men can. So it's not that men can't be intuitive. I know plenty, I consider myself intuitive. I know plenty of men that are intuitive, but I do think women have an advantage in this way, where they do have a natural connection with their emotions even faster than most men do. So I think it's a huge advantage to continue to develop, for sure, for everybody, but it's a great asset.
So let's talk about the 3 dimensions of intuition: directional, social, and informational.
Yeah, so basically how we've really cut this through is there's 3 ways that we look at intuition. So there's intuition with yourself, intuition with self and other, then intuition between yourself and the whole environment. So this has so many business applications where the first step is really, how do I learn to connect with my own inner compass and my decision maker? So we call it directional intuition because it's really how we make decisions in our direction, how we navigate our business day.
Our self-GPS almost?
Our inner GPS, exactly.
Okay.
And so I actually call it the navigator.
Okay.
So I have little nicknames for each of these.
Okay.
The second one is the vibe detector.
The vibe detector.
Which is about social intuition. So if the first one goes this way between me and learning my own signals and cues for how I receive information intuitively, the second one is how do I read out what's happening in the space with other people? So it's about
do I vibe
interpersonal.
with the other person, right?
Yeah, it's checking out the vibes, whether it's one-on-one or one-to-many. So if I'm doing an investment pitch or I have an audience, how do I track in real time what the needs are? And so I can pivot in the moment if I need to, which is so valuable as a business person. Or if I'm doing a one-on-one sales conversation, how do I learn to read nonverbal communication and body signals and everything that's going on that's not being spoken? So social intuition is so huge, not just in business, even in personal life. And so the last one then is informational intuition, which I call the integrator.
Okay.
So we've got the navigator, the vibe detector, and the integrator.
Okay.
And I do want t-shirts for each of these one day. And so the integrator is how do we integrate all the information that we're receiving in the whole environment? So it's not just about interpersonal anymore. It includes that, but it also transcends that. It's about all the data in your decision making. So for example, if we're doing a business deal, I have to first check in with my decision maker, like, okay, does this feel right? Am I on the right track with this agreement? And then I tune into the vibe detector. Does it feel right across the table? And with the partnership that I'm trying to work out this negotiation with, are we on the same page? Are we giving and taking in the right ratio, the right percentage? And it feels like we're in a real agreement. There still might be a third variable that's off though. So even though this feels totally right in our business negotiation, maybe the timing is off. Maybe we need to get more information from our suppliers that we don't have. So there's a whole other data set that we have to be able to discern and include in our decision making that might have nothing to do with how I feel about it and how we feel about it. So that's where these 3 dimensions really serve a business. And so we actually take leaders and help them develop their 3 dimensions of intuition with practical experiential exercises over the course of a day or 2. And it's amazing to see how they then navigate their decision making when these come alive.
If 2 of the 3, or let's say all 3 should be in alignment, but as you mentioned, if 2 are positive and then 1 is off, would that mean that, what's that process, I guess, you know, in terms of alignment of the 3 dimensions? Yeah,
this is where intuition is so critical, is being willing to feel like, hey, I still want this deal to go through, we both want it, but why do we feel like, or do we notice that life is showing us it's not happening? And even though our best intentions want this to go forward, but there's always roadblocks that are showing up. What if that's feedback that we need to pay attention to? And yeah, maybe we can still overcome that, but we still need to pay attention to, is there a pattern here? Are we noticing this is harder than it should be? Those are some ways that you can start to decode and use your integrator in that way. Or just even asking the questions like, oh, is this really what wants to happen now? Is Q3 when we should be launching this product? Or are we actually just trying to stay ahead of our competition, but we haven't even done the beta testing. And we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot if we launch this right now. So that's where it gets really interesting in a team meeting or a strategic planning, when are we really tuning into not just what our agenda is and we see profit on the wall and we aim for it, but are we actually making the best holistic decision for our company? It forces you to take a step back to assess the whole picture. Because exactly, like the integrator makes you go to more of a meta perspective, where you're seeing everything from a bigger view. If you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, for me, I think of it like the integrator is like seeing the Matrix code. It's like, oh, okay, it's Q4, not Q3. It's like you're able to see all the patterns using pattern recognition, using your experience of your industry and your craft, and really knowing the essence of that area so you can make a better decision.
Rick, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about your book. Really insightful, and the key takeaway is to trust yourself.
Trust yourself.
Thank you.
You got this.
Great. Wow, what an insightful conversation about tapping into your intuition. I hope you learned something today. I'm Lindsay Christian. Thanks again for watching.